Happy fall, y'all. This is a beautiful rainy day in Buffalo Gap, and do we need it? And that ground out there is just sucking that rain up. So I just wanted to share. I don't know where I got the idea to do this topic. I just wished I hadn't. it's, it's about, I just got to thinking about how relapse is such a part of addictions, and that's what makes it a disease, is that it has a relapse component. And then I got to thinking of all of the work I've done, and professionally and private, personally, about codependency, and a member of Al-Anon since 1968, and I know a little bit about addictions and how the family is affected from the family's point of view. But when I got into it, I didn't realize that it would bring up so many memories of mine. And it's just, so I want to say this is a disease. And years ago, we used to call the disease, the addiction of any sort, is the merry-go-round of addictions. And on that merry-go-round is all the family members. And I see it more like on a kid's playground. We used to have an old merry-go-round at school here. It's probably 100 years old. And it would go round and round and round, and then after a while, someone would fall off. And then everyone would have to readjust. And that's kind of how addictions are, and what happens when the addict of any sort falls off of their recovery, when they relapse. Now, it can be make a very significant impact on the family. It can impact the family emotionally, psychologically, financially. It can affect the family in every way. And I do talk about it in family weeks, but I don't know that we've talked about it enough. I really have gotten it, how affected the family is for, when their loved one relapses. And because if you've lived around an addict, or you're an addict yourself, if you're an addict yourself, addictions are self-centered. Addicts are self-centered. When we're in the addiction, we're all wrapped up in ourselves, and we make a very poor package. And so we really, a lot of times, and particularly, I did not know the impact that my eating disorder had on my children. I knew that their father's alcoholism had made an impact, but no, not me, not my eating disorder and other behavior. Actually, I had more effect on the children than my husband did in his addiction, because children have a way of knowing. Children know when a parent is sick. And so, they gave my husband a big hall pass. And I would resent that, because here I am keeping the home fires burning, and chasing my tail every day, trying to keep up with everything. And everyone would sympathize with him. And then, bless his heart. And so I just had to really think about this topic when I, on a personal level. So, my mother was severe alcoholic and prescription drug addict, and I loved her dearly. I loved her till the day she died, and she was my project. She was my everything. I loved and adored her. And I was thinking this morning, my mother got 1 year of sobriety. Now, this is what happens to children who are raised in alcoholic homes, particularly, I think, more so with the mothers, the identified patient. But anyway, my mother got a year of sobriety when I was probably 13 years old. And when she got that year of sobriety, it rocked my world. You would think I would love it, but I didn't. I hated it, because my mother was my focus. And when she got sober, she, took back the checkbook. She became responsible. She started going to meetings. She had a sponsor. She talked on the phone a lot. She was gone a lot. And we had been just so connected physically. I mean, just like lived in each other's skins. And I felt very abandoned that year because my job was taken away from me. And this is what happens with children of alcoholics. We're absolutely assigned, it's almost like we're assigned a job. A lot of times the oldest one, well, like I was the youngest, but my sister, we called it escaping. She left home very early. And that's what adult children do. They either stay in the trenches forever and always, or they leave early to escape. So I remember that, I was thinking this morning about that year of her sobriety, and I was pretty miserable because I didn't know what my place was. I had, and there was no talk, there was no alities, there was no, anyone telling me what was happening. And then my sister would come home from out of town, and she was older, and she wasn't really an adult, but she was older than me. And so they would sit down and talk and kind of want me to go outside or something. Anyway, I remember that year was a very lonely year. Now, did I cause my mother's relapse? Absolutely not. But after that first year, she did relapse, and she never gained sobriety again. But I remember that year, and this is why I believe it's so important to educate children. And children are smart. If they have lived through the years of addiction, whether it's an eating disorder, codependency, or alcoholism, if they've lived through it, they have every right to be educated about it because they know it from the trenches. They know what it's like to live with an addict. And then when the addict of any sort does get in recovery, the whole family shifts. It shifts. And so I want to just kind of briefly go over what happens with the family and the breakdown that can happen inside the family. And so one of the things is that emotional turmoil. When there is any sort of addiction in the family system, there is turmoil. There is turmoil. And so when you take the addict out, we used to, was taught, to see a family system on a mobile, like over a child's bed, all those little animals, and they're all balanced out. And the child, as they get older, can kind of hit that, and it'll rock, and they'll laugh and coo and all that, But you take one of those little animals off, and that mobile just goes just goes upside down. It is no longer balanced. And that's what it is like when an addict gets sober. It upsets everything. It upsets the system. And if the system doesn't get help themselves, when I'm talking about the system, that's, that is the spouse, that is the parents, that is the children, everyone needs help. And, we have Family Week here. That is probably one of the biggest pieces that we do here. We do good work at Shays, but that is a real big piece that we do here because it's so important to educate the family, because a family of an addict is used to having an identified patient. And we see this all the time. When one starts getting better and starts getting healthy, guess what? Out pops another one. And what that does, it keeps the status quo. It makes the system get back into balance, because then all the focus is on maybe the one that went to treatment and got into recovery as an alcoholic. Well, then they're on their path of recovery, and then maybe the other parent has covered up their eating disorder for years, and now it comes to light, and so they become the IP, the identified patient, or one of the teenage kids, or one of the grandparents. It's just important in an addictive system to have an addict in order to survive, and we don't know that when we're in it. Abnormal becomes normal. The addict does something, we either react or respond. So I want to kind of go over this, that the emotions that when there is a relapse, that in the family, a lot of times those emotions, there are a lot of emotions. One of the biggest ones, I think, is just a sadness. It's such a grief when, particularly if the addict has had some time in the program and the family has began to adjust and maybe, start living their own lives, and then all of a sudden there is this relapse. There's a real sadness to it. And the idea, here we go again. And then there's a lot of grief, a lot of unresolved grief, a lot of disappointment. Before my husband and I were together 51 years, and, I was in Al-Anon many of those years. We married in 62, and I found Al-Anon in 68. So we were, entrenched, I was, and of course, spoke recovery around the house. It took me years to do that because I was such a rager. I was the one that abused our children. So what happens when the addict relapses, all those old feelings can come back in a heartbeat. They can come back, and it's that feeling of disappointment. And, a relapse is never in a timely manner. Relapse happens. Well, I remember one time, and like I said, my husband gave me permission to share our story, and that includes, his. But I remember when our youngest baby was born, he had had some sobriety. Now, he was dry. He wasn't sober. He was not using the drug alcohol. He was not in the fellowship of AA. And actually, I had it was in 68 when our younger one was born, and how he celebrated, but he had a time, he had quit drinking because I pressured him into stopping drinking. I guilted him into it, and it was not a happy camper. So how he celebrated our youngest daughter's birth was he went out and got drunk. And I remember the shame that I had up at that hospital, how, we were to be celebrating the birth of that new baby, and here that sucker was over here drunk and mouthing off at the nurses. He loved women. He never went outside the marriage, but he just enjoyed women. So he'd be mouthing off at them and talking about, she's the our baby, she's the prettiest one in there. And he'd say, look at all those other ugly babies, and look at Christy. Anyway, it was embarrassing, and I would take that on. I would take it on. So relapse isn't easy. And those emotions would come up, and there's a wide range of emotions. And what mine would always end up, when there is or was a relapse, and is the bottom line: lots of frustrations, a lot of disappointment, and the bottom line is helplessness. Now, helplessness, if you're in a 12-step program. And we have a friend, Dr. Jim, Father Jim, that talks about this. If you're in a program, you learn about powerlessness. And when you have a loved one that relapses, what it will put you in is a state of powerlessness, which is a good thing, because when you're really powerless and you realize you can't sober up anyone, then what we do, if we're in a program, we reach out to the God of our understanding. But that's usually way down the line. We have all these feelings come up, and and those feelings of helplessness and the feeling of powerlessness. And powerlessness is a gift, because when we feel so powerless that we can't do anything, it puts us into a state of surrender. It's like, okay, God, I can't do this. I'm putting him or her in your hands. But if people have not been introduced to their own recovery program, if they're not in Al-Anon, or if they are, not seeing a therapist, or both, we recommend both, then all those feelings can turn to anger, which turns to rage, and they just feel a sense of betrayal. They take it personal. They did this to me. And, it's hard to get past that when, we might have all the education in the world, but until we apply it, it doesn't mean anything. It really does not mean anything. I want to tell you, when as a young kid and a young teenager and an older teenager, I know I was 17 years old, and my mother had spent that year in AA when I was 13. And I started looking for answers, and I read her big book through and through. And we lived in Odessa, Texas, and someone told me that there was going to be a speaker in Midland, Texas. I didn't know what a speaker was. I didn't know anything about it. But anyway, I actually went over there with what had been Mother's sponsor. And it was Father Martin who spoke. I don't know if any of y'all remember Father Martin. Father Martin was so instrumental in the early onset of treatment for alcoholics and addicts. And he, sitting there listening to that man, helped me so much understand how the family, he really talked more about the family and how they were affected, and how it's, if the family doesn't get help, we will unintentionally sabotage the client's treatment, because we'll start complaining about the meetings they go to, the time away from home, the time on the phone, the this, the that, and it takes a long time sometimes. That first year particularly, I always have said, after I got into the field, if we could take a couple, put one of them, that first year of recovery, one of them on the East Coast, the other one on the West Coast, and they do their recovery diligently for a year, and then at the end of that year, bring them back to Texas, the center of the U.S., and see what we've got. Of course, we don't ever get that, but it is, I keep saying, it's so important for the family to have their own recovery, because you think about me as a child, my whole focus is not just me. Any kid that has an addict for a parent, that's their whole focus, is trying to sober them up, trying to dance around them, and so when they sober up, their life, their focus has been taken away. And I remember when I took my mother to Big Spring State Hospital when I was 13, drove her over there, and I remember that it was after she had relapsed, and this was not our first rodeo, it was not our first trip to Big Springs, but I remember that social worker patting me on the hand, and she had said, "Now, honey, you go home and live your life, and we're going to take care of your mama." And I wanted to say, "Yeah, lady, but you don't know, she is my life. I have no life without her. I was lost without having my mother to take care of." And I loved looking back, I loved in a certain way, and every minute of it, because I'll tell you, for an adult child or a child of an alcoholic, the sort that I was, it elevates you to a level that you're doing adult behavior. You're doing things that adults do, but you don't really have the skills or the inner strength to do it. So you have to fake it. You have to fake it. And I grew up in my entire life playing like I knew how to do something. Even when I got into the field, I thought one of these days they're going to realize I don't know what I'm doing. And that starts in early childhood, being raised or having an addict for a parent, and then the other one being gone, an absent parent, and then staying home with my beloved mother that was so sick. I want to keep saying she was not sorry. She was sick. And on a certain level, I knew that. I knew that from really the day I was born, I think. So not only does it affect the addict, it affects the family, it affects the children. Relapse puts a strain on the relationship. Like, let's say if you have a child that's an addict, maybe an adult child or even a teenager at home, and they're the addict, it can put a wedge between the coupleship. The husband and wife, because maybe one has gone off and gotten help and the other one hadn't. That was our situation. And when one of my daughters, the acting out daughter, and I'm not calling any names, but when she was acting out, she was my entire focus. I transferred my focus from my mother to this daughter, and it was like to my husband, and then my daughter. It was like my job to get them well, to sober them up, And so my entire attention was on, and we raised 7 children altogether, not all the time. He had 3, we put a family together, we had 7, and so I was a busy woman, but my focus was on the child, the acting out child. They demanded you better focus on them. And it was me searching for help and then me raging at her. I was part of the problem and didn't know it at the time. I was just doing what I thought I could do to take care, help my daughter. So it doesn't work. What happens? It comes between the coupleship. And then what my husband would do, this particular child, he loved and adored all of his children, but he really loved and adored this one because she was a spitting image of him. It's like he cloned her. I mean, they look alike, they act alike, which that is good news, bad news. And he bonded with her against me, because he would take up for her, here I was, Miss Al-Anon, and I knew not to give her money and not to do this and not to enable and all. And so he would go behind my back and enable her. And I will tell you the sick part of this, on a certain level, I liked it, because I knew I could work my program and not enable her, because he was going to be back here in the background picking up the pieces and helping her. We get sick in this stuff. So anyway, you have to watch about the relationship. And my mother's addiction got right between my husband and I. When we moved down here, I was 19 years old. And the first month that we were married, my husband put a notepad and a pencil by the telephone, and he said, envelopes and paper and pen. He said, write your mother letters. And then he laid a copy of the phone bill there. I had run up a $75 telephone bill the first month I lived in Abilene, Texas, calling my mother all the time. 75 was a lot then. That was back in 62. So you have to really have a united front. If there's an addict in the family, the coupleship will suffer if you're not careful with it. And it'll be the mother will blame the dad will blame the mother. Grandparents will get involved. A lot of times grandparents will do the rescuing. And so this is why we insist to the best of our ability to bring in every family member that we can, to stop the cycle of addiction and the cycle of blame. So relapse can become the elephant in the living room. You know, the disease was the elephant in the living room. And so then the addict recovers, all is well, everyone loves it, everybody celebrates, and goes on, you know, not everyone, but anyway, the codependent a lot of times feels like their job is taken away from them. But by and large, life is better when there is a sober addict in the household. And then what can happen is they relapse, and then relapse becomes like the elephant in the living room. No one talks about it. No one talks about it. And, you know, I would tell my children, do not go to school and tell what's happened here last night. What I didn't want them to tell is what a raging idiot mother that they had, and that I was on his back, you know, and that's what I didn't want them to know. And we were active in church. If church could do it, oh my Lord, we'd been so healthy for many years, because we were there every time the church doors open. I thought, and my husband, I believe both, because we didn't understand addiction. I think we both thought we were very bad people and that we went to church to get good. And, you know, I would act good, he would act bad during the week. But anyway, you know, so we were church-going people. We were believers. We believed in God, more like agnostics, because I had no idea to turn my eating disorder. This was the time I weighed almost 300 pounds. We didn't know. We didn't know how to treat an addiction. So anyway, the relapse becomes like the elephant in the living room. No one wants to talk about it, because if you don't talk about it, it's not real, and it's hurtful. It's hurtful. I want you to even hear me say that. It's hurtful. You hurt me when a family member tells an addict that has relapsed. You hurt me. That is so much codependency, and that is, it's all about that the codependent is all wrapped up in themselves, and you haven't really accepted that addiction is a disease. Because if your loved one had cancer, you know, you would not feel hurt because they relapsed and had to go back to MD Anderson. You know, you would have pain of it because the fear that they might die, the fear that they wouldn't come out of you know, go back into remission. But you wouldn't say, you hurt me by relapsing, but that's what family members say to addicts. Oh, you hurt me because you got drunk, or you hurt me because you are no longer on your meal plan, and you know, I heard you throwing up in the bathroom. You hurt me. People who have other diseases never use that terminology, and that is dyed-in-the-wool codependency. It's putting that on the addict, which they do not deserve. And this is why we have got to get in our own hula hoop and get our own help. So, some then react, you know, my reaction was rage. My husband's reaction was to, you know, when our, you know, beloved child would relapse, it would upset all of us. And, you know, he would get silent, and he would get silent with me. We call it silent violence because you can feel the anger underneath, you know, and here I'd be over here raging my guts out. He would be stony silent, but it would be more directed at me, like, why haven't you done something? I was trying the best that I could. Why did you let her do this? You know, those words wasn't spoken, but the silence is millions of words, you know, silent violence does. And, you know, one time and my husband was quiet and he could do this, but he spent 30 days that he never spoke one word to me. He was so angry at me because someone in our family had relapsed, and he blamed it on me families get sick. I hate to tell you folks, or ours did, maybe yours did, but ours did. And so I took all of that on. I took it all on. And then, in the meantime, I get a call from my dad from Odessa. Maybe mother had been in treatment again, had accumulated a little bit of sobriety, and then she'd relapse. He'd call me, and, my dad was violent, and he'd say, if you don't come up here right now, I've got a gun to her head. I'm just going to blow her head off. And I would feel guilty if I didn't go, but I had a house full of kids. So anyway, this is not all about me. It sounds, but I want to tell you one thing. When my youngest daughter was 13 and she had an older sibling that was acting out, and we had a horrendous week or two, horrendous. This youngest daughter, I'm not saying she was perfect. I do not want to put that on anyone. She was pretty close to it. High grades, popular in school, did the deal. I mean, she was your typical lost child / hero. She played both of those roles. And I remember one night we were standing and we were all arguing about, the identified patient, and my youngest daughter said, in this family, if you don't have a problem, you don't get any attention. That said a lot to me, and I had been in Al-Anon since that 13-year-old had been a baby. I carried her to Al-Anon, and they let me bring her. And 13 years later, I was much better than I was when I started, but we were still focusing on the identified patient, and it disrupts the entire family. So another thing is the financial strain. Particularly if you've got multiple relapses and they go back to treatment, and in today's time, sometimes insurance pays, sometimes it doesn't, puts a big financial strain on the family. We have seen family members mortgage their home, give up their retirement, and they do it gladly, thinking that their loved one is going to get help, and they do it because they want to help their loved one. And so they do it, they pay, and then, sometimes there are people who have multiple relapses. But I will tell you, as long as they're breathing in and out, there is hope. I have seen people that relapsed off and on for the first 5 years. And then they would, what we call, get it. They would wake up one day. Sobriety is not using a substance. Sobriety is mentally, emotionally, and spiritually healthy. And I have seen them 5 years out, get it, and live a life of recovery. So don't ever give up on an addict. Don't ever give up on an addict. If you love an addict, first thing I learned in Al-Anon, it's okay to love an addict. Just don't love them to death. Do not do for them what they're capable of doing for themselves. The people in AA, because I went to a lot of open AA meetings. Those first 14 years, went to Al-Anon, worked in the field. I was already a program director of a treatment center, and all of that. But anyway, don't ever, I don't know what I was going to say, but what I'm going to say is don't ever give up on an addict, because we never know. That is the addiction, or any disease, is between the addict and the God of their understanding. So the first thing I learned in Al-Anon was it's okay to love an addict, just don't love them to death. And then I learned from my friend Penn Melody this phrase that I love. I love this phrase. And what it is, and I wished I'd heard it much sooner, but I guess I heard it when I needed to. And that was to get off of the addict's back. Get off their back, get out of their way, give them a wide berth, and get on with your own life. And that's actually what my children and myself did. The kids were in Alateens, which they hated my guts for making them go, but they learned a lot in Alateens. We were going to family therapy every Wednesday night for 1 year. The kids hated my guts for that because they had to take out their time to go to therapy because of someone else, that they didn't want to do that. But it's, what we did, me and the kids, is we got off of my husband's back. We got out of his way. I gave him a wide berth. I quit chasing him down the road. I quit pulling him out of beer joints. I gave him a wide berth. And I told him one day before I did this, I said, honey, I went up to him and I said, I love and adore you. I have since the day that we got married. But I love you much more now. I didn't really love you a whole lot then because I was just looking for a way out of that sick home, but I didn't tell him all that. But anyway, I told him, I love you. I care about you, and I want to see you sober, but I'm not going to go down with you, and the children are not either. You can drink all you want to, and if that means drinking yourself to death, I will be very sad, and I will plan your funeral, and I will go to it. But in the meantime, I'm going on with my own life. I had friends, I had community, I was gone a lot because I could not stand to stay around. And I worked, I had a life, the kids had a life. And so it wasn't long after that, it wasn't anything to do with me, but it wasn't probably a month after that. One after Sunday afternoon, he said, we'd had some AAs out to the house. They were always coming out, and he'd go out and talk to them and tell them that he was an ex-alcoholic, but that he wasn't an alcoholic anymore. Of course, he'd been drinking that day. And my beloved Pat, she would come out, and there was a couple of them, AAs out in the playroom playing pool. And then they left to go to a meeting, and on the way out, because by this time they were friends with my husband, and Pat called him R, and she said, R, you want to go to a meeting with us? And he said, nope, not ready yet. So I was doing laundry. I was out in the laundry room Sunday afternoon doing mine and his laundry, because by that time I had learned to let the kids do their own, but that's another story for another day. But anyway, I hadn't gone to church that day, and so I just had on I was not dressed, had no makeup on. Don't think I'd combed my hair. And he came through there and he said, honey, will you go to that meeting with me? And I said, what meeting? And he said, I want to go to that AA meeting. And I knew they had an Al-Anon meeting. I knew that was AA meeting was a closed meeting. And I looked at myself, and those of you who know me, I do not walk out my front door without being put together. But I left because we didn't have enough time for me to get put together. So I went on over to the Al-Anon room. He went into the big AA meeting. And then this was all a part of his story later, and hundreds of people have told me this. They called on RL, he picked up a chip, and what he said was, I don't know what you folks do up here, but it's changed my wife's life, and I want what she has. I'll tell you what, that is the highest compliment an alcoholic can give to an Al-Anon. And he said, I want what she has. Her life has changed, and it's changed our family. So anyway, the point is, family members, get your own help, because you're going to be, if there is a relapse in the making, or if there is a relapse, you're going to be affected, and financially is one of the big ways. And family members do not begrudge. I've never seen a family member yet, maybe one or two, that's begrudged paying for treatment. What I tell people, if they've got a young adult or an old adult, or anyone, pay for their treatment. Pay for their treatment, and then what happens is they get into recovery. And on the onset, sign a contract, because if they get in recovery and I always say when they get in recovery and they become responsible, they'll pay you back. And we really work with them, the addicts, to pay pay the family back. All right, so that's enough of that. And it can puts a lot of stress and strain on the family and that financial instability. And so then number 4 is it neglects other family members, like I gave you the little story about my youngest daughter, Christy. Also, there'll be a lot of family members, kind of left out because, there's shame around a relapse. You've celebrated recovery, and now here we go again. And so there's a lot of shame around relapse if the family takes it out. This is if you're not healthy enough to know that relapse has nothing to do with the family. It's all about the addict. It really is. Don't join them. What you can do is stand with them, stand tall in your own recovery. And so for the number 5, it really affects people's mental health. And if a family member, and I've seen it, if they don't get help themselves, they can break down in stress-related illnesses, every kind of stress-related illness that there is. They can, Sarah and her friend are swatting mosquitoes or something, or fly. But it's, we break down, family members can break down in stress-related illnesses. They can break down in their own addiction, their own eating disorder, every kind of stress-related illnesses, and then mental illness, depression, anxiety. Years ago, before computers, we were taught in the addiction field that in large corporations, the way, the heads of the people ahead of departments, if they suspected there was an alcoholic in their midst, one of the ways that they kind of figured it out was that they would go to the medical file of the family, and they majority of the time would find a fat medical file, and the children would have upper respiratory problems, they would have allergies, they would have stomach problems. The family begins to carry the disease themselves, and they break down in stress-related illnesses. That's why everyone gets sick, everyone needs help. So, let's see, the last thing is there is a solution. There is a solution, and I've told you what the solution is. Family members must get help. And Al-Anon, I'm not going to tell you any details, but I've had a friend that, anyway, there's been someone that has lost a loved one to the addiction. Her loved one never found recovery. And his mother came to me years ago, and we sat out on my screen porch. She wasn't a client, never went through anything at Shade. She was a friend of mine. And I told her about Al-Anon, and she went to Al-Anon and became a card-carrying member of Al-Anon. Is she sad about her sons, losing her son to the addiction? Absolutely. But she's got tools to help her through this tragic time. I hate to tell you folks, not all addicts make it. Not all addicts make it. They either recover or they live their lives out in some form of institution, jail, mental hospital, some form of institution, or death. That's the bottom line. But the good news, everyone can get help. And there's programs set up everywhere for family members. They even have Alatots. I keep wondering when they're going to have Aladog. And so they might, so that's what I have on relapse and how to fix the family. And then when the family is so wrapped up in their feelings, when an addict relapses and goes back to treatment and comes back and they're rebuilding, their sobriety, reconnecting with God, their understanding and their community, and they're back on the path, the family can play a real big part in this by being so angry at them. What I want to say is get off of your own rear end and get some help and see your loved one that is an addict through some eyes of grace and forgiveness. They didn't ask for this damnable disease. And they either have it or not, and I'll tell you, it has a very high rate of, it runs in families. And so those, who really talk down about the addict, you ought to go look in the mirror. Check out, do you have any of your own addictions? Okay, I've stopped sharing and gone to preaching, so I'm going to open it up. I've got some people here that have suffered relapse and come back. I've had people that, so anyway, y'all share, and I'd really like to hear from some of you that have gone through the relapse and what you have seen with your own family, and maybe how recovery has helped them. So who wants to start?